patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm your host, Sherman Tylowski, as always. Make sure you subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and family. I really appreciate all of your support. We are on episode 30. I'm so glad to have all the support that you guys are giving me. Every single week I come out with new content and you guys take a listen. And I just want to express my gratitude, as always, for what you do to support Friends and Fellow Citizens. Today, I have a very special guest with me. She and I were actually classmates not too long ago, just about a year ago, and she has been so gracious enough to come onto this show to share with us some really great insight about a topic that is going to be of even more importance by the day. You look at congressional hearings, you think about the hearings recently involving Microsoft and FireEye, other cyber companies, sharing with Congress about their ideas of how the U.S. government should be moving on with cyber. We're seeing cyber espionage from all kinds of adversaries trying to harvest what is central to America's innovation. We're seeing, unfortunately, during the COVID pandemic, everything from COVID-19 scams, including IRS-related scams, including stimulus check scams, all kinds of challenges that are constantly facing our critical infrastructure and the way of life. And today's guest is going to be sharing with us not only a little bit about cyber, but about how women in cyber can advance not only the female workforce in America, but perhaps around the world. My special guest today is Amanda Custer. Amanda Custer is a Master in International Affairs candidate at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. Originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico, Amanda completed bachelor's degrees in international studies and Spanish at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. Her passion for international relations was fostered through 2 research internships at the Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Institute at the U.S. Army War College, before she found her true passion for the intersection of cyber and national security through a summer internship at the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C. Since beginning her graduate school coursework, Amanda has become a subject matter expert on disinformation campaigns targeting public health and elections, and cybercrime mitigation through intelligence sharing. She will be moving to D.C. to pursue a career in cyber threat intelligence upon graduation. Amanda, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me today, Sherman. It's great to be joining you on International Women's Day of all days, so great to be here with you today.
Absolutely. So, I want to first ask a little bit about your interest in cyber. I think when we first met, I was very curious to know how you got into cyber. You've been involved in cyber-related groups and other activities. So just give us a general view of how you got interested in this particular field.
Yes, absolutely. So as a student of international relations, foreign policy, and national security, I've always come back to cyber time and time again because it is such an integral element across every discipline, but it is seldom emphasized or studied as the core issue. While the attitude can be that only science, technology, engineering, and math students or professionals can understand or do cyber, I think that discounts us as social scientists and students of foreign policy's ability to contribute. And we are huge contributors and we do need to understand cyber. So I found my passion here because not only does cyber have a hand in every element of statecraft, international relations, national security, but I think we need to see more people get excited about it and get interested in it and study it and become literate in the field.
Great. And what are some ways you think, off the top of your head, or something that you've researched recently that you think would get people excited about cyber? Because I think one of the barriers of entry, in my view, is that cyber sounds really technical. It sounds like something where you have to go to get a computer science degree or a cyber degree of some kind, and you got to be able to cross wires or something. Some people like myself can't, making a pot of spaghetti is already kind of a big success for me, much less crossing wires. What do you think are some ways that we can get excited about cyber without having necessarily the technical expertise?
Absolutely. So I think the best metaphor in my mind, which I always tell to fellow Bush School students, is that understanding cyber in our context, if you think of being a car mechanic, I think of that as the people with the hard skills, right? They can take apart the computer, they can take apart the car, they can reprogram it, and they understand how to make it work, how to break it, and how to fix it. I would like to equate my skills with being able to lift up the hood of the car and understand what the various parts are doing and know why they're important and give my analysis. But I am not the person breaking the car. I'm not the person doing the penetration testing or the red teams, but I still have to understand what the parts are, why they're important, and how they interact with each other in the outside world. Furthermore, I think just reading cyber news from a non-technical perspective. So there's great websites like Cyberscoop, like the MIT Science Review, a lot of sites nowadays that publish really great short articles that tell you sort of the bottom line up front. Why is this cyber issue pressing? How does it work? And why is it interesting? And from there, you can kind of gauge your interest and say, hey, you know what? I don't know what this type of ransomware does and what it means. How is it? What threat vector is it using? And you can kind of spark your interest starting from those websites and those like basic news sources.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. I think I also like the thing you said about keeping up with what is going on in cyber, because that's certainly a reflection of how much technology changes and how cyber is going to change the way we look at technology and how it works and coexists with us. What about those extracurricular activities that you got into? Just tell us a bit more about what you did and what you got out of them.
Absolutely. So I'll share with you one of my favorite extracurricular cyber activities that I got to do right before COVID. So as a participating member of the Cyber Career Club at the Bush School, I attended the Atlantic Council Cyber 912 case competition at Columbia University in New York City it must have been November 2019. Seems like a world apart, right? But that experience was so valuable to me because we had the opportunity with 3 other Bush School students to go and compete in this scenario where it's called 912 because it's as if there were to be a cyber equivalent of 9/11. So you're given these fake news documents, these fake intelligence reports, and you have to come up with a comprehensive solution under a time crunch, under pressure. And then you get evaluated by judges from law enforcement, from the intelligence community, and from private industry on how viable that solution is and what they would do. And I think that this was such a fantastic experience and competition that got me incredibly fired up because it put into context how important these skills are and how important it is to be able to distill down a problem and find a solution, especially when it comes to national security and cyber issues. And I would say that's one of my fondest memories outside of the classroom with cyber at the Bush School and as a graduate student.
That sounds really exciting, and I wish I had that kind of opportunity myself. To be able to get involved in these kinds of scenarios and kind of really put yourself in that kind of position, right? Now I want to move on to some of the broader cyber issues. Obviously, we're not going to have time to delve into each and every single one of them in a whole lot of detail. I mean, I think each of them is an episode or a series of episodes, really, altogether.
Absolutely.
But what do you think are the most pressing cyber issues you think are facing America and the rest of the world today?
Absolutely. So there's definitely three that I'd love to touch on, and I completely agree that they could be totally separate episodes. So the first would be securing intellectual integrity and discourse in our political sphere by combating disinformation. That is a topic that I'm very passionate about. Second would be critical infrastructure protection. I know that that's something that we see in the media a lot, but it is a continued effort on the part of our private sector, disaster preparedness, Department of Homeland Security, DoD, you name it. And lastly, cyber literacy and incorporating that into our education system, because we've seen very successful examples of that with, say, Estonia, after they faced a grave cyber attack in 2007. But I think that the US stands to benefit from improving our education on cyber and the literacy that we give from day one in kindergarten up through the university system.
Let's touch on the first one here about disinformation campaigns, because that's obviously a really huge one. And I think the issue with this one is that it also touches upon some civil liberties concepts, doesn't it? Because on the one hand, you want to ensure that people have the information they have, and you have to have facts. But on the other hand, you have all these numerous ways that people are trying to manipulate facts. Nowadays we have the terms like alternative facts as a term that is often circulated in discourse. What do you think is really the big issue when it comes to balancing cyber security, right? Ensuring that you have factual information while at the same time preserving the right to free speech on particular platforms?
Well, that is the $1 million question for sure. I think you really touched on the points that I would make, that absolutely we are very lucky to live in a democracy, a free and open society where we can be critical and we can have numerous points of views on any issues. The main concern that I see with disinformation is that the threat it poses to our democracy is that we need an informed electorate for democracy to function, and we need to have civil discourse. And disinformation fundamentally tries to sow chaos and turn people against each other and cause confusion. And when you have foreign elements and actors trying to throw a monkey wrench in that system, it is very challenging to say, how are we going to mitigate and essentially try and filter out those voices that we know are outside malicious actors versus what our own citizenry is trying to share and say to one another. So that is a very hard balance to strike. And I think we've seen, the European Union and California with the GDPR and the CCPA frameworks try and tackle, the questions of whose data, what rights do we have to our own data, how companies need to handle privacy issues, especially following the Cambridge Analytica scandals in 2016. And I don't think we've come up with a comprehensive answer yet, but I think it's something that our national security apparatus, our state and local government, and the private sector needs to be aware of and continue to work on and ask those tough questions. So like I said, mistrust is a core goal of disinformation. Whoever perpetrates disinformation wants there to be mistrust, wants citizens, when they read a public health announcement or an election result, to question it and to be concerned and to strike fear. And how we combat that is a very multifaceted problem. I think that we need to start with young people and look at critical thinking, analysis, and give people the tools to fact check, to think critically about the information that they are being exposed to. But also we need to continue to have trusted channels, whether that is, the Department of Health of a certain county or any sort of trusted entity that can be sort of the voice of reason to say, hey, we've done the scientific studies on X, Y, and Z, and we know that it's safe to drink this water, or we know that it's safe to receive this vaccine. And from that point, trying to combat people who are spreading falsehoods or fear or hate surrounding concrete fact.
I think what you said about institutions is really profound, because I've been saying this for a while too, and I'm sure others have as well, which is all about preserving something that's going to last a lot more than just a policy or an election season, or something even along the lines of maybe a generation or two. We're talking about building blocks of society, and it just feels like when we try to build an institution or try to maintain it, we see another 10 that seem to collapse. And it's going to be a long road ahead, but I think we need to put what you have said into practice for sure. Let's move on to something on literacy, particularly cyber literacy, as you mentioned before. What did you mean by literacy, and how do you think that links with the civics process that we are all tasked to maintain and protect for future generations?
Absolutely. I think forming and developing critical thinkers through education is incredibly important, and especially when it comes to cyber and like the topic of disinformation that we're on right now. Giving people the tools to say, if they see something in a book or online, or that their friend reshares, to take the extra 2 seconds and think, where is this information coming from? Is it grounded in fact? And being able to do your own research on it, right? And look at scientific studies. I'm a big proponent of, I'm always reticent to share my opinion with people unless I know that my opinion has been formed by a lot of literature research and a lot of grounded information, right? Because I think we are touching on that people are very quick to throw out an opinion without having done all of the background research behind it. And I think we should also normalize having those open conversations with friends, with peers and colleagues of, hey, where did you get that information? I'd love to talk to you about it. Having an open dialogue, because that's something that also concerns me about disinformation and mistrust in our society, is that we're so quick to put up walls and to shut down our friends and even our family in the political climate that we have nowadays. And I think that we need to be having more open conversations and more civility and more honesty with one another, and challenging each other to read more, to research more, to dive in more on their beliefs, on the news, on whatever topic it is, specifically anything that you find online. But to be a critical consumer, but to also be a good listener, and to be willing to have a two-way discussion with people.
Yes, and I think when we explore these solutions more in depth in future episodes, and when we get all kinds of folks to weigh in on this, it's going to be really interesting to see the diversity of answers, because we did a really great episode with Ed Wynn back in November, and he was commenting a little bit about some of these ways to get involved, getting involved in local, state governments and other initiatives. But I'll make sure to link that on to the show notes at the end of the episode, or at least down below when it's posted. Now I want to get a bit more into the crux of today's episode now, which is about incentivizing women to enter the cyber profession. I think there's no doubt that we want the most talented workforce out there, but we also want to create as many equal opportunities as we can. I'm a huge proponent of equal opportunities. Having that ability to enter a field that might not have been possible not too long ago. So, Amanda, what is the landscape like in terms of women in the cyber profession?
Okay, absolutely. So I think before diving into the gender breakdown of women in cyber and women in STEM, I think it's first important to mention that we currently are facing a very large cyber skills gap. So in 2020, it was estimated that the cybersecurity skills worker gap was as large as 4 million workers globally. But other conservative estimates place the worker shortage at 3 million, with at least 500,000 of those in North America. So we know that the world and the US are facing a critical need for these skills and for people with these skills, and that cybercrime is costing us trillions and trillions of dollars. It's estimated to hit 6 trillion this year alone. So I think that aside from what the dynamics are currently, that we need we need our women to step in and fill these roles, and there are women that are more than qualified for that. We know, for example, that 57% of professional occupations in the US workforce are held by women, but only 26% of the cyber occupations are held by women. So that's a big disparity, right? We have a lot of very educated women. We only see most ballparks between 22 and 26% of those women then being funneled into the cyber profession. And then when we look at the top echelons, it's even fewer. So in 2019, for the top 1,000 companies, only 18% of chief information officer positions were held by women. So we see kind of this upside down funnel, right? We have a very educated female workforce that's very capable, and we see smaller and smaller percentages going into cyber careers and then going into positions of power within the cyber world. And I think with this work gap, something that we so often forget is that women have been the pioneers in fields like this before, when there was a shortage of workers, especially when we look at the First and Second World Wars. While all of the men were off risking their lives on the battlefields, we had women who were pioneering cryptanalysis in order to be able to win the wars smartly. And one of my absolute favorite stories about this is a name that I hope everyone who's listening to this today will go and look up and remember, is Agnes Meyer Driscoll. She was amazingly born in 1889, and she went on to train virtually all of the major male naval codebreakers noted for their World War II contributions. She also helped design the Navy's first ciphering machine and figured out how the Japanese disguised their fleet. And these impacts were very tangible. So in 1936, when her code breaking allowed the US to learn that the Japanese had refitted a battleship to be able to travel in excess of 26 knots, this gave the US Navy the chance to upgrade their battleship classes to exceed that speed. So the number of lives saved by these women who stepped up, contributed to national security, and even prior to there being this sort of vacuum in the field where they needed the women, they were already pioneers, and the men going to war gave them the opportunity to show that they were qualified and that they had these special skills to help the US and the Allies win the war.
That's a really good story, and I can tell that those intelligence classes are really paying off there.
They are.
They're amazing classes at the Bush School, amazing faculty who provide us amazing stories and give us that foundation. I want to ask about some more of these opportunities. I mean, you mentioned kind of the overall landscape as well as the bit of the gap. What do you think of things like, for example, cyber scholarships? You know, scholarships that are offered to young women. It could be young as middle or high school, depending on the program. But it can usually it's offered maybe college level or college graduate level. What do you make of opportunities like scholarships and fellowships that are particularly tailored towards young women?
I think it is an absolutely fantastic solution to encouraging women to join a field that is still very male dominated and that can be very intimidating. And quite frankly, education is expensive, right? And we know that we have a skills gap. And so by incentivizing women to be able to afford to study these things and afford to better themselves, we are enabling not only the skills gap to close, but we are empowering women to study a very, very important field and something that maybe they would feel um, intimidated or shy away from. And that when you see these opportunities trying to get women into STEM and into cyber, I think that that makes a world of difference.
Yes, and it adds on to that meritocracy, that equal opportunity aspect, which I really love about cyber scholarships and other initiatives. Something a bit different here. I've heard a lot of things coming out from the federal government in terms of initiatives try to get women into the cyber workforce. What do you think of the school districts and the local and the county levels, as well as state governments pitching in? Do you think that's maybe a better idea, a better approach to incentivizing young women to enter the cyber workforce?
I think that's a great idea. I think encouraging young people of both genders, but especially women, to get excited, to get interested, the younger the better, right? So that we have people who are looking for those scholarship opportunities for college and people who know that they want to pursue a passion and identifying that talent. I also would say that with that, I think it's very hard to be a smart woman in middle school or high school, right? We all remember middle school and high school dynamics. It's not an easy time. So I think ensuring that the wonderful teachers and professionals who are working with these young people are making sure that there is proper mentorship, proper representation, and really fostering that growth within the young people, to ensure that they're not discouraged, because I think it's very easy to feel discouraged at a young age. And I was very fortunate to be the daughter and the granddaughter of two female engineers. So my grandmother and my mother are both female engineers. So I grew up hearing the stories of the challenges faced by women in male-dominated fields. And I have to give both of my parents, but specifically my mother, a lot of credit for being an incredible role model to encourage me to keep pursuing these passions and keep being persistent, even if I was the only woman in the room or the only girl in the room at the time, because that can be another hurdle that we face. So we need those programs, but we also need to be very intentional with those programs and ensure that girls and women's voices are being heard and that they are getting the support that they need to feel included and to feel empowered in that situation.
Wonderful answer, and I'm really glad to hear that you got inspired yourself and you got to be right there to hear those stories. And no doubt in my mind that those have carried through in your life, given what you've already done so far. And I'm so pleased to hear about the kinds of things that you're always doing and the things that you want to do, which I think brings about to my final question to kind of wrap up our kind of substantive part before we get to maybe some of the reflections, kind of putting this all together. What do you envision yourself doing as a potential leader to try and change the cybersecurity workforce? What are some things that you're looking right now in terms of like current initiatives or anything like that, or just anything that you like to do and like to see and get changed as we move forward in the years to come?
Absolutely. So I think the biggest point for me, whether it's as a woman in cyber, as a woman in foreign policy and national security affairs, something that I'm always very conscious of is trying to be a resource to other women and sort of pay forward the excellent mentorship and friends that I have had who have done the same for me. And I think an important part to emphasize with this is that it doesn't always have to be other women. I had a absolutely fantastic undergraduate advisor, Professor Anthony Williams at Dickinson, who always advocated for me to achieve my goals. And something that he told me that has stuck with me to this day is that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I think that as women, we are so often afraid to be strong advocates for ourselves in our careers. But this advice has carried me so far, and has reminded me to keep persisting. And so, building on that point, I want my male colleagues and fellow male professionals listening to this to know that you have a very critical role to play here too. Encourage your female peers, advocate for them, make sure that their voices are being heard and that they're aware of the opportunities open to them. And please, please, please speak up if you see injustices against them, because this is a solution that requires all of us as policymakers, all of us as cyber professionals. We want the best team possible at the table when a crisis hits, right? So doing that through supporting each other, mentoring each other, and making sure that everyone's voices are heard and that people can be the best contributing members of any given team is something that I will always carry forward with me through my whole career, but something that has also gotten me to where I am today.
On top of that great answer, I just want to say that it's really heartwarming to hear that you're calling for as many people as possible to come together and put together the best cyber workforce we can. That message of unity, I think, is what we need nowadays. And this leads me up to our last bit of this episode. And every week we have something to do with tying in Washington's values. This is really the crux of this podcast, and I'm curious to know if there are one or two of the principles that we've outlined in this podcast so many times you think could be very relevant and perhaps helpful in understanding this idea of how to develop a workforce that best reflects the talent in our country and how it best reflects the ability of young women across the country to be able to contribute to such an important field like cyber.
Well, the first one that really jumps out at me, of course, is education and the really critical role that plays in inspiring children and everyone, right, to find whatever sparks a passion in your life. And, of course, I hope that that's cyber for many other people. But education fuels so many things. It fuels civility. It fuels fiscal responsibility. It fuels patriotism, giving people the tools and the knowledge to do all of those things, to make great choices, to learn, to experience, to better their country. I am a huge, huge proponent of education and its importance. So I would say that in being a student and a future practitioner of foreign policy and cybersecurity, that would be my biggest value that I'd emphasize.
Yes, and I think what you said about fueling the other principles, this is definitely one of the common themes that I've noticed too, is that no matter which of these values or principles that people choose, they all are tied in together to some degree, and they all are each other's building blocks. Without
Absolutely.
one, you can't have the others, in my view. I just wanted to just ask. I asked you. You're coming from Dickinson College, and you knew I was going to ask you about a founding father question here because your school was basically founded by Dr. Benjamin Rush, and because of him, you can't be able to escape out of this question I have for you about the founders,
Okay.
which is as we know, with the founders, there's a number of people that we admire. But if you were to pick one founder that you admire the most or you find most interesting, which one would you pick and why?
Oh, goodness. That's a tough question. Well, I do love Abigail Adams because she was a fierce woman who reminded the gentlemen to not forget about us ladies, even though it took a very, very long time after she tried to tell them that for us to get, the right to vote and things like that. But I do have to give Ben Rush the ultimate shout out, of course, because without him, the wonderful educational opportunities that I had at Dickinson College would not be around today. I think it's just those two, though, that come to mind that I've had the strongest when I think back at my education in the U.S. those two names stick out the most. So I should have had some more Ben Rush quotes prepared, Sherman. If I had known, I should have known. As a Dickinson College graduate.
I know exactly what you're going to do right after this podcast, right?
Right. I'll have them postered all over my wall next time. So
I need to see Benjamin Rush fandom. Like I want to see the biggest fan of Benjamin Rush that I've ever seen. Like I want you to go full overboard on that.
Some true dedication, huh?
Right. But he's definitely one of the, I think one of the smartest guys out there, not just because he's a doctor, but because, he was, I think in my view, he was part of that intellectual group, within the founders. Not that no one there was an intellectual, very few people were. It's just, you kind of have the activists like Sam Adams, but then you have, folks who are maybe low key, but who are kind of the masterminds behind a lot of the really interesting things that happened during the American Revolution and the founding of the country.
Yeah, they're a remarkable group of people, right? That founded a pretty awesome country. So we're pretty lucky to have had them.
Exactly. I mean, we learn from them. We learn from not just how they succeed, but also how they were so imperfect in so many ways, right? I think this is part of just learning, learning about the successes and the imperfections of people.
That's so true.
Amanda, I want to thank you so much for a really great episode. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I told you before this podcast, this is the first cyber security interview show that I've ever done, or episode I've ever done. And I want to just communicate to you and to the audience that this has been a really great foundation for future conversations, because we have to keep the conversation going. We have to have more people on to share with us more about all these different subjects, because this is part of our mission, and I think part of our vision to fight back against some of those challenges which you raised regarding foreign adversaries trying to disrupt our democratic process, whether it's other bad actors trying to just sow discord. There's all kinds of things that we're doing, and I want to thank you so much for being on here and to share what you know. And there's no doubt that you're going to be doing some incredible things in this field, and I can't wait to be able to see that and watch alongside the Friends of Fellow Citizens community to see you make the positive changes that we badly need today.
Well, thank you so much for having me today, Sherman. And I am so excited to hopefully get to discuss more cyber events with you down the line. And I appreciate everyone's time, and I look forward to joining you in DC pretty soon here. So lots of things to look forward to.
Absolutely. We're all set to go, right?
Yep.
All right. Well, it'll be there before we'll be at that time of the year, so quick, and I can't wait to see you. And I would absolutely love for you to come back onto this show. I really will. We're gonna get in the meat of these topics here. We got to really tackle them.
We will. Disinformation next, and
yes,
who knows
that's
what
right. Disinformation, you're going down.
Exactly. We'll single-handedly fight it.
Yes. Well, thank you all for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and family. I really appreciate all of your support. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week, and I'll see you next time.